When we first hired Clara, I didn't think much of it. My wife and I, we both work demanding jobs, and despite how much we wanted to spend time with our daughter, Anna, we just couldn't manage it. I'm ashamed to admit it, but we needed help. Anna deserved more attention than we could give, so we agreed it was best to bring someone in. Clara seemed like the perfect choice. Kind, responsible, and most importantly, she had experience with kids. Anna, she's always been a bit different. She's a sweet kid, don't get me wrong, but ever since she was little, she had this tendency to make up imaginary friends. First, we thought it was normal. Plenty of kids have imaginary friends, right? But lately, it's gotten more intense. She talks constantly about this girl named Emily. Every day after work, when we'd ask her how her day was, she'd mention Emily. It was like Emily was everywhere, part of everything Anna did. I brushed it off as typical childhood stuff. My wife too, though she seemed a little more concerned. It's just a phase, I tell her. She'll grow out of it. I mean, how much trouble could an imaginary friend cause? When Clara arrived, I made sure to mention Emily. She's a bit obsessed with this Emily girl, I explained. Don't be surprised if she talks about her a lot. Just play along. This harmless. Clara nodded, smiling like she'd heard it all before. I felt relieved, honestly. Things went smoothly at first. Clara was great with Anna, and Anna warmed to her quickly. It seemed like hiring Clara was the best decision we'd made in a long time. But then, a few weeks in, Clara started looking uneasy. At first, I chalked it up to her getting used to Anna's quirks, but then she started asking questions. "Mr. Davis, can I ask you something?" She began one evening, her voice a little hesitant. "This, Emily that Anna talks about, how long has she been around?" I laughed it off. "Oh, probably a year now. I know it's strange, but Anna has a vivid imagination." Clara's face didn't change. She wasn't smiling. "It's just, Anna talks about Emily like she's real. She tells me stories about her, like where she lives, what she wears. She even says Emily's in the house, watching us sometimes." That made me pause. I hadn't realized it had gotten to that point. But still, it's just make-believe, right? Kids do that. "It's nothing to worry about," I assured Clara. "Anna will grow out of it. Trust me." But Clara didn't look convinced. A few more days passed, and I started noticing small changes around the house. Nothing major, just odd things. Anna would set the table with an extra plate for dinner, claiming it was for Emily. Toys I hadn't seen before appeared in her room. Dolls, little trinkets, and when I asked where they came from, she'd shrug and say, "Emily brought them." Clara, on the other hand, seemed more and more uncomfortable every day. One evening, she finally confessed something that made my skin crawl. "I saw her," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I frowned. "What do you mean?" Clara looked around, as if someone might overhear us. There was another girl there, standing by the window. She had her back to me, but I swear it wasn't Anna. She was wearing this old-fashioned dress, and her hair. It wasn't Anna's hair. My heart skipped a beat. What happened then? She disappeared, Clara whispered. How could I respond to something like that? It sounded impossible. My rational mind fought against it, but the look on Clara's face was undeniable. She believed what she saw, and she wasn't the type to scare easily. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house, every soft sound from Anna's room down the hall, made me tense. A few nights later, I was sitting in my office, trying to catch up on some work, when I heard Anna talking. Her voice carried through the quiet house, soft but clear. "No, Emily," she was saying. "Daddy will be mad." "Emily, please," Anna continued. "He'll see you." I stood up, heart racing, and walked quietly toward her room. Her door was cracked open, and I could see her sitting on the floor, facing the window. The moonlight spilled into the room, casting shadows along the walls. But she wasn't alone. There was a figure standing next to her. A girl about Anna's age, with long dark hair and an old, faded dress. Her back was to me just like Clara had described. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. It wasn't real. Then, as if sensing me, the girl turned. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes, they were empty. I slammed the door shut, my hands shaking. This was no imaginary friend. Emily was real, and whatever she wasn't human. I don't know what to do now. Clara quit the next day, saying she couldn't stay in the house any longer. My wife doesn't believe me. She thinks I'm stressed, that it's all in my head. But I know what I saw. And Anna, she still talks to Emily every night. After Clara left, things escalated quickly. My wife, Sarah, remained skeptical, brushing everything off as stress-induced paranoia. "You're working too much, Mike," she'd say, her eyes filled with concern but also that hint of disbelief. "Clara spooked you, that's all. There's no such thing as ghosts." I wanted to believe her, I really did. Emily wasn't just a figment of Anna's imagination. She was something else, something darker. The next few nights, I barely slept. Every sound in the house made my heart race. Every shadow seemed to move. But it was Anna who worried me the most. She seemed different, distant, as if she wasn't really with us anymore. When she talked, it was often in a low whisper, like she was sharing secrets with someone only she could see. And always it was about Emily. "Daddy, Emily says she doesn't like when you're home. Emily doesn't want Mommy to come into my room anymore. Emily says she was here first, and this is her house." Each time she mentioned Emily, a chill ran down my spine. Sarah, of course, waved it off as more of Anna's overactive imagination. "Kids make stuff up," she insisted. "It's what they do." But I had seen her. I had seen Emily standing there, in the moonlight, cold and hollow, and I knew something was terribly wrong. One night, I decided I needed answers. Anna had fallen asleep, and Sarah was downstairs watching TV. I went into Anna's room, feeling foolish but desperate. I sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the corner of the room, where Anna always seemed to focus when she talked to Emily. "Emily, are you here?" Nothing. Just the creak of the house settling around me. I swallowed, my throat dry. "What do you want with my daughter?" For a long moment, there was only silence. But then, as if the temperature had dropped suddenly, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room. The curtains fluttered, though the windows were closed. And then I heard it. A soft giggle, high-pitched and distant, like a child playing a cruel game. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I could feel her presence, lingering in the hallway, watching, waiting. Emily was no longer just an innocent imaginary friend. She was something else, something that wanted more. I decided it was time to do some research. I needed to know what we were dealing with. If Emily was real, and I had no doubt now that she was, there had to be some kind of history attached to this house. After a few hours of searching through old records and online databases, I finally found something. The house we were living in had been built over 100 years ago, and one of the first families to live here had suffered a terrible tragedy. A young girl named Emily had died here under mysterious circumstances. She was about the same age as Anna when she passed. The details were vague, but there were whispers of an accident. Emily falling from the attic window, though some reports hinted at something more sinister, something about her being pushed by an unseen force. I sat there, staring at the old black and white photo of the girl. It was hard to make out her features, but there was something unnerving about her eyes. It was her, the girl I had seen in Anna's room. I tried to tell Sarah, but she just rolled her eyes. "Mike, this is crazy," she said, her frustration evident. "You're scaring yourself over some old story. There's no ghost. No, Emily." But deep down, I knew she was wrong. That night, I woke up to a noise. Footsteps, light and deliberate, like a child walking across the floor. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. The sound was coming from Anna's room. I rushed down the hall and threw open the door. Anna was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide open but unfocused. She was staring at the corner of the room, the same corner where I had tried to talk to Emily. "Anna?" I whispered, stepping cautiously toward her. She didn't look at me. "Emily says you shouldn't be here, Daddy." My blood turned to ice. "Anna, come here," I urged, reaching for her. But she didn't move. And then, from the shadows, I saw her. Emily, her face pale, almost glowing in the dim light. She stood there, her head tilted slightly, watching me with those empty, hollow eyes. I froze, my hands suspended in the air. My voice caught in my throat. "Leave her alone," I managed to choke out. "Leave my daughter alone." Emily's lips curled into a slight smile, but it was devoid of warmth. Her presence was suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Anna, still in that trance-like state, murmured softly, "Emily says she wants to stay," and then, with a sudden, violent gust of cold air, the room seemed to erupt in chaos. Anna's toys flew off the shelves, books scattered across the floor, and the lights flickered wildly. I grabbed Anna, pulling her into my arms, and rushed out of the room, slamming the door behind us. As I held her tightly, I could hear that same soft giggle echo through the hallway, fading into the night. Emily wasn't going anywhere. The following days were a blur. Sarah and I barely spoke. She was convinced I was losing my mind, and maybe she was right. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every moment I felt like I was being watched. Anna, though, seemed unfazed by it all. She still talked about Emily like she was her best friend, but there was something darker now in the way she spoke. Something that terrified me. One night, when I couldn't take it anymore, I decided to confront it head-on. I waited until everyone was asleep, and then I went into the attic, the place where Emily had supposedly died all those years ago. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of old wood and mildew filled my lungs. As I moved further into the attic, I could feel that cold presence again, stronger than ever. I stood there in the dark, heart racing, and whispered, "Emily, if you're here, show yourself." And she did. She stepped out of the shadows, her small figure illuminated by the faint moonlight coming through the window. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Then, in a voice that chilled me to my core, she said, "This is my house. You need to leave." I knew then that Emily wasn't going to let us go easily, but I wasn't going to let her have my daughter. I just didn't know how to stop her. I couldn't handle it alone. The next morning, after another sleepless night and more eerie occurrences around the house, I made a decision. Sarah had dismissed everything, but I knew something had to be done, or we'd lose Anna. Or worse, Emily might try to hurt her. I reached out to a local historian, a man named David Ellsworth, who specialized in paranormal research. He wasn't the kind of person I would normally turn to, but I was desperate. I needed someone who understood what we were dealing with. When I told him the story about Emily, he seemed both intrigued and concerned. "This isn't the first time I've heard about Emily," David said when we met at a small, cluttered office lined with old books and strange artifacts. His voice was calm, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. There have been other reports over the years of people seeing a young girl in that house. Some claim she was harmless, but others, well, not so much. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? He sighed, pulling out an old, yellow document. Emily didn't just fall from the attic window. There were rumors, unconfirmed of course, that she was involved in something darker. Some say she was dabbling in things she didn't understand, and after her death, her spirit became something much more sinister. What kind of things? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Occult practices, summoning spirits. According to some accounts, Emily was trying to contact something, or someone, and whatever she found, it didn't leave her. What does that mean for us? For my daughter? David leaned forward. It means Emily might not be the only presence in that house. If Anna is seeing her, talking to her, it's possible that whatever Emily brought into this world is now attached to your daughter. I could barely process what he was saying. My head was spinning. This wasn't just about an innocent spirit trapped in our home. It was something much worse. Is there a way to stop it? I asked, almost pleading. David hesitated. There are ways to sever the connection, but it's risky. If Emily's spirit has been bound to the house for this long, breaking that bond could have unpredictable consequences. I didn't care about the risks. I'll do whatever it takes. David nodded slowly. We'll need to perform a cleansing ritual, something to force her out of the house and break her hold on Anna. But you need to be prepared. Spirits like Emily don't leave easily. And if there's something darker involved, it may fight back. Despite the fear gnawing at my insides, I agreed. I had to protect Anna. I had no other choice. That evening, David arrived at the house with a bag of supplies. Candles, incense, strange herbs I didn't recognize, and a heavy book filled with symbols and chants. He walked through the house methodically, setting up in each room, while Sarah watched from the living room, her skepticism barely concealed. She didn't believe any of this, but she went along with it, if only to calm me down. Anna was already asleep when we began. David insisted it was better that way. Easier to break Emily's hold if Anna wasn't awake to interact with her. This will draw her out, David explained, lighting the candles and placing them in a circle around the living room. Once she appears, I'll start the ritual. But you need to stay calm, no matter what happens. Spirits feed off fear. Easier said than done. The air in the house grew thick as the candles flickered and the smell of burning herbs filled the room. I could feel a strange energy gathering, something cold and oppressive, as if the house itself was tightening around us. And then it began. At first, there was just a faint whisper, like wind rustling through the walls, but it grew louder, more distinct. A child's voice, laughing, echoing from every corner of the house. David started chanting, his voice firm and steady, but the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and I could see my breath in the air. The lights flickered, and suddenly, the shadows on the walls seemed to shift, twisting and bending unnaturally. Then there she was, Emily. She stood in the doorway of the living room, her figure barely illuminated by the candlelight. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and hollow, just as I had seen her before. But this time, there was something more menacing about her. Something wrong. Leave, David commanded, his voice loud and authoritative. You are not welcome here. But Emily didn't move. Instead, she smiled, that cold, cruel smile that sent a shiver down my spine. And then she spoke. She's mine, Emily whispered, her voice like ice. Anna belongs to me now. The room seemed to shake, and the candles flickered wildly. David continued chanting, his voice louder now, but Emily's presence grew stronger, more powerful. I could feel her anger, her determination to stay. Suddenly, from upstairs, I heard Anna scream. I bolted toward the stairs, but before I could reach her, the door to her room slammed shut with a deafening bang. I pounded on it, shouting her name, but the door wouldn't budge. Behind me, David's chanting grew more frantic. "We need to finish this," he yelled, his voice strained. "She's trying to take Anna." In a panic, I rushed back downstairs, desperate to help. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls warping and groaning under the weight of Emily's presence. I could see her form flickering in and out, like a broken image on an old TV. And that cold laugh, it echoed in my mind, relentless. Then, as David reached the climax of the ritual, something changed. Emily let out a piercing scream, a sound so unnatural and filled with rage that it made my ears ring. The air in the room seemed to explode, the candles snuffed out, and the oppressive energy vanished. For a moment, there was silence. Nothing but the sound of my own heavy breathing and David's labored gasps. "Is it over?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. David slumped down into a chair, his face pale and drenched in sweat. I think so," he muttered, sounding unsure. "The bond should be broken, but you need to watch Anna carefully. If Emily was this strong, she may have left a mark." I didn't understand what he meant, but I didn't care at that moment. All I wanted was to see my daughter safe. I rushed upstairs and threw open the door to Anna's room. She was lying in her bed, curled up under the blankets, fast asleep, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. I could feel it. The house was quiet, too quiet. Emily was gone, at least for now, but there was a heaviness that still lingered, like the air hadn't quite cleared from what had happened that night. During the ritual, the chaos had been overwhelming. As David chanted, the energy in the room grew thick, oppressive, and it wasn't long before objects started flying off shelves. Books, picture frames, even the lamp by the couch, all began swirling through the air as if caught in some invisible storm. The room seemed alive, twisting and convulsing under Emily's rage. And then, in the midst of it all, a chair came crashing down. I heard Sarah cry out in pain. She had been standing near the doorway, too stunned to move, and when the chair struck her, she fell hard, clutching her leg. I rushed to her side, my heart pounding as I tried to pull her away from the chaos. "I'm fine," she gasped, her face pale but determined. "Just finish it." David's voice rose above the commotion, louder and more urgent. He was pushing back, fighting to drive Emily out. But the room was shaking violently now, objects slamming against walls and shattering on the floor. It felt like the house itself might come down around us. Then, as David reached the peak of the ritual, there was a sudden, piercing scream, Emily's. The air exploded with energy, knocking us all to the ground. The candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, there was only silence. No more flying objects, no more whispers in the shadows. It was over. I scrambled to Sarah's side. She was breathing heavily, her face twisted in pain. "Your leg," I started, panicked. "It's just a sprain," she muttered, wincing as she sat up. "I'm okay, but what the hell just happened?" Her voice shook, not from the injury, but from the sheer shock of what she had just witnessed. Sarah had always been the rational one, dismissing the idea of ghosts and spirits. But now there was no denying it. She had seen it, felt it. "I don't know, but I think it's over." David slumped into a chair, exhausted, wiping the sweat from his brow. "It should be," he said, though his tone was uncertain. "Emily's gone. For now." I helped Sarah to the couch, her face still pale and shocked. She didn't say much after that. How could she? What we had just experienced was beyond anything we could have imagined. She had seen the proof with her own eyes. Flying objects, the oppressive presence of a spirit, and the sheer force of Emily's anger. As the house fell into an eerie calm, I looked around at the wreckage. Broken glass, scattered books, overturned furniture. It was like the aftermath of a violent storm. But the quiet that followed was unnerving. Emily might have been driven out, but something told me this wasn't the end. I could feel it in the air, and worse, I could see it in Anna. Something wasn't right. That night, as I tucked Anna into bed, her eyes wide and serious, she looked up at me, her voice soft. "Daddy," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart." "She's still here," Anna murmured, glancing toward the corner of the room. My heart froze. Anna didn't meet my eyes. She just stared at the darkened corner, where shadows gathered unnaturally. "Emily," she said. "She's just waiting." My blood ran cold. Emily hadn't left. She was just biding her time. In the days that followed, the house remained still, unnervingly quiet. It felt like the tension that had gripped every corner, every creaking floorboard, had finally loosened. There were no more strange occurrences, no flickering lights or cold drafts in the night. Emily, it seemed, was truly gone. But Anna wasn't the same. She barely spoke, her once bubbly personality now replaced by a kind of emptiness. She often sat by herself, staring off into space, as if she was still waiting for something. Every time I tried to talk to her, to get her to open up, she would just shrug or respond with short, distant answers. "Emily's gone," I told her one night, sitting beside her on the bed. Anna looked at me, her eyes large and solemn. "Emily's just not here anymore." I nodded, unsure of what to say. I wanted to believe that meant the worst was behind us. But deep down, I knew Anna was still carrying something with her. Not Emily, but the damage Emily had caused. I scheduled a few sessions with a child therapist. Sarah agreed, finally realizing that this wasn't just a phase or some imaginary friend gone awry. Our daughter had been through something traumatic, something we hadn't been able to protect her from. The therapist, Dr. Jacobs, listened patiently as we explained everything. Well, as much as we could without sounding completely insane. I wasn't sure if she believed in ghosts, but she listened to our story without judgment. "Anna has been through a significant psychological trauma," Dr. Jacobs explained after one of Anna's sessions. "Whatever she experienced, real or imagined, has left a deep emotional scar. She feels like she's lost someone important to her, this Emily. And that grief is hard for a child to process. So, she's not still seeing her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Jacobs shook her head gently. "No, there's no indication she believes Emily is still around. But the attachment she had to this imaginary friend, it was real to her. Anna needs time to process that loss, to understand that Emily is gone and won't be coming back." It made sense. Anna had clung to Emily for so long, believing she was her friend, her constant companion. And now that Emily was gone, even if Emily had never really been a friend, that sudden absence must have felt like losing a part of herself. "With time and support," Dr. Jacobs continued, "she'll heal. But it's important to understand that Emily was more than just an imaginary friend in Anna's mind. She represented something, perhaps a way to cope with loneliness or stress from changes at home. Now, she's facing that loss, and it's going to take time for her to rebuild. As much as I wanted to breathe a sigh of relief, knowing Emily was truly gone, the weight of what had happened still hung over us. Sarah and I had spent so much time focused on the ghost, on Emily, that we hadn't seen the full impact it had on Anna. The danger wasn't just some malevolent spirit, it was the emotional damage left behind. Over the next few weeks, we worked hard to bring a sense of normalcy back into the house. I made an effort to spend more time with Anna, playing games, reading stories, and just being there in a way I hadn't been before. Sarah, too, became more attentive. The nightmares, which had plagued Anna for so long, began to fade. She still woke up sometimes, crying out in the dark, but more often than not, she'd tell me she couldn't remember what had scared her. The shadows in her room no longer seemed as threatening, and her fixation on that dark corner had gradually disappeared. One afternoon, as we sat together in the backyard, watching the clouds drift by, Anna leaned against me and sighed. "Daddy?" she asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Emily was ever really real?" Her question caught me off guard. For so long, I had fought with myself over whether Emily was a real spirit or just a figment of our daughter's imagination, brought to life by something we didn't fully understand. But now, sitting there with Anna in the warm sunlight, I realized the answer didn't matter as much anymore. "I think," I said carefully, "that Emily felt real to you. And sometimes, that's enough to make something seem real, even if it's not." Anna was quiet for a long time. "I'm glad she's gone," she whispered eventually. "But I kind of miss her." I wrapped my arm around her and pulled her close. "It's okay to miss her," I said. "We're here. And we're not going anywhere." She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. But this time, the shadows felt different, less threatening, more peaceful. Emily was gone. Not just the ghost, but the fear, the anxiety, and the hold she had on our daughter. And as long as we had each other, I knew we'd be okay. Sometimes, the scariest ghosts aren't the ones that haunt our homes, but the ones that linger in our minds. But with love, with patience, and with time, even those can fade.